Fashionistas, I'm Thomas.
And I'm Spencer.
Quick disclaimer, this is for education and entertainment purposes. If you need help, please see a professional. We are not experts, nor do we give medical advice. Take our words with a gallon of salt.
Hey, Thomas, what's the question for today?
The question is, who are other people?
Well, they're not me. I know that. But what are you trying to get at? What do you mean, who are other people?
Part of what I mean by that is, how do I understand other people? What are the ideas I have of who other people are in my head? And how do I understand them? How do I go about understanding people? And what are the ways that I'm maybe not going about it right now?
Interesting. You're almost making it sound like people are complex and what we view them as can either cause us problems or oversimplify who they are to us.
Yeah, and that's pretty natural. Human behavior is... there's a good quote by George E.P. Box. I think he was a mathematician. And he says, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Awesome.
So before I get into kind of the meta level, I want to go into a couple examples of how we try to process people, how we try to understand them. The very first thing I want to focus on is, how do I process someone acting in a way that I didn't expect?
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. This is actually a little exercise that I like to do sometimes. When someone I like says something I don't like, or when someone I don't like says something I do like. Essentially, oh, I think this is a good person. And then they say something, you're like, oh, that's awful. Or you find out they did something awful. But then you see somebody who's a bad person, and then they have some good, nice quote. That's one of the funniest things to do, is to like stumble on quotes on the internet where people are like, hey, look at this nice quote. By the way, Stalin said that. You just agreed with something Hitler said.
Well, and I'm wondering if that gets into the fallacy of either, I'm wondering about a fallacy of no true Scotsman, or what's the one that you always like to talk about where you stab arguments are soldiers. Yeah. Where if you agree with an argument from the opposing side, then you're stabbing your soldiers in the back and weakening your stance and soldiers. And we can't have that, right?
Oh no, can't mess up your team cohesion. Otherwise, you could listen to criticism and change what you're doing. It's from Eliezer Yudkowsky. He calls it the arguments are soldiers. It goes something along the lines of, to agree to any point of your enemy is to defect to the enemy. And to critique any point on your side is to stab your own men in the back.
Which is interesting, and it feels like similar to this, where just by acknowledging someone that you enjoy or you agree with or you believe in, and then they say something wrong or inappropriate or not aligned with your beliefs, then all of a sudden you are facing a question of, should I stab one of my own soldiers in the back?
If you view it that way, that's what it feels like.
Right.
So that's talking about the team aspect to it, but I want to dive in a little bit more to you have this individual who you view as probably good or bad, and they say something that is the opposite of the nature you assumed. For example, and I'm seeing a lot of people in the writing community trying to deal with this right now, some pretty awful accusations have come out against Neil Gaiman.
Mm-hmm.
And this has happened to other creatives before. You've probably heard things about, I've heard things about Joss Whedon. You've got J.K. Rowling. You've got James Dashner. And it's always interesting watching people try to react to that. Like, either it comes out that they did a lot of horrible things, or they say something horrible, or even the opposite. Like, I know I was making the joke about Stalin a second ago, but what was it? I can't remember it right now. But there was a quote from Stalin that was something actually nice. And how do you react to that? You're like, wait a minute. I had that person in the bad bucket. Or no, I had that person in the good bucket. That's why I try not to follow like celebrities and stuff, because I feel like eventually I joke and I say, another one bites the dust.
Yeah.
Meaning another person that I liked or thought was good or thought was smart or I wanted to put on a pedestal as a good example to follow has fallen from that. And then you have people who are actually long dead, but they have like complex legacies. Like I think about like H.P. Lovecraft. He had some pretty racist thoughts, but he's still one of the most influential writers in horror, especially cosmic horror.
Mm-hmm.
Are you an immoral person if you make a reference to H.P. Lovecraft because he was a racist? Are you a bad person if you keep, I think I still have mine, your copy of Stardust by Neil Gaiman after you learn that he was a bad person and did really horrible things to women and other people?
The one that I'm thinking of is the Me Too movement, where there was definitely a lot of allegations and a lot of things that were coming out, and not many were disputed, which ruined a lot of careers, but possibly for good purpose because of the actions and behaviors of certain people.
Yeah, it created a lot of consequences for people who had done things in the past and people who are considering doing things now.
Yeah. And yet the one that I think I had the hardest time, and I'll admit, is I grew up listening to Bill Cosby comedy specials.
I can't believe I forgot about Bill Cosby.
Yeah. And I thought, man, he's so funny. And then here's where I think is an interesting thing is I grew up enjoying and loving a lot of the things that he said, and they seemed very tame and what's the word?
Benign?
Yeah, they were benign, and they were just funny, and they were funny for funny's sake. And his chocolate cake thing is really silly and hilarious.
He's great. He gives us chocolate cake.
Yeah, I mean, it was very funny. And then allegations came out, indictments came out, and he was found guilty, and probably rightfully so. Makes me wonder, can I quote those things? Can I make mention of those funny things? But then also, it gives me a sense of reevaluating them and saying, are they as funny as I thought they were? Or was a lot of what he was talking about traumatic and inappropriate in a way that...
Well, then you almost have like hindsight is 2020 kicking in.
Yes.
Because you're like, oh man, J.K. Rowling has said some pretty awful things now. Now I'm going to go back and read her books. Like, oh my gosh, it was everywhere in there.
Right.
And it's hard because it's like, how much of that is confirmation bias? Like, I'm looking for things of prejudice, where prejudice seems to be shown as acceptable in J.K. Rowling's works.
Mm-hmm.
House elves, but goblins. It's very easy to create a story about someone and find clues to make that story work. But then every once in a while, people will do something that feels completely out of character for the character you have in your head of them.
And I want to bring this a little bit closer to home, because I think as much as we can say, oh, well, I'm never going to read that book again. Okay, fine. You're going to be able to live without Harry Potter, potentially.
Maybe.
Depending on who you are. But I've got neighbors that have flags that are of a different identity politic than the flag that I have in my front yard. And there's that question of, if I think of someone that I think of as good, but I find something bad that they do, has my opinion changed, or vice versa? Their flag is something that I disagree with. And what if they do something nice for me? What if they bring me a cup of sugar? And does that change the whole perspective of there is value and there is common ground, and then there is a space for me to be able to coexist with them respectfully and benefit from our relationship from each other. I also noticed he has a nice wood shop in his garage, and one of these days I should reach an olive branch just because maybe I can leverage some of his tools.
Well, I've got a really good friend who has very different stances than me on a lot of moral issues. And my more liberal leaning friends would probably say that he's a bad person, he's a monster, he thinks evil things, he wants people to suffer. But first off, his belief system is more complicated than that. Second off, I've not met many people who are more charitable, willing to reach out and help, and kind when you're having a hard time or suffering than him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like, I see all this demonizing that happens online towards people who have certain opinions and stuff. It's funny how we try to stick people into good and bad buckets, and we do so much work to fit them into a good or a bad bucket when we could actually use that work to accept people as nuanced. It's like the universe is nuanced, and so you work really hard to ignore the nuance when you could just, all right, everybody's complicated. Like George, I like some of the ones with the historical figures we were mentioning when we were brainstorming this. I listed a few founding fathers like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, Christopher Columbus. He's not a founding father, but historical. You get people like Gandhi, who is apparently a dick to his wife. Mother Teresa apparently has a complex, or was it Jane Goodall? I don't know. There are these people that have complicated legacies. It's actually really fascinating to hear the experience of the man who played George Washington in Hamilton the first time on the stage show.
Mm-hmm.
And he's an African-American actor. And he's playing this character, George Washington, who owned slaves. How do you play that role? Because in my opinion, George Washington, especially in his example and in how he encouraged the United States to replace their presidents, it's like they wanted him to stay, and he was like, nope, I did my 8 years, I'm done. And then you've got this other side of him. So it's like he defies certain levels of characterization.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson, too. He wrote some great words and also probably boinked his slaves.
Well, I think it's genetically confirmed that he did.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't it pretty much like, yeah, he did?
No, I believe he did. And that was quite common the more I learn about slavery and the history of American slavery, that for a woman, slavery was also sex slave, which is a really hard thing to hear. And when I first heard it, and I think this is ultimately kind of one of the things that we get to, which is when you find someone that you perceive as good and then find out something bad about them, or you perceive as bad and find out something good about them, how do you respond to that? How does that make you feel? And how do you take that information in, and do you immediately reject it, or do you try to consider it? Because especially if it becomes an argument, our soldiers, it's like, oh, I have to reject that because I can't hear what happened to Thomas Jefferson or what Thomas Jefferson did. Or I don't want to know that George Washington's teeth were made from slaves' teeth. They were not wooden teeth like I grew up learning.
Wood and ivory, and I heard a few different materials.
Yeah, but it was a very benign origin of his teeth, when then later you find out, no, they were from slaves. And you have to come to terms with that, whether, again, it's my neighbor that has a flag, but they come over and they're very nice when they talk to me, or for Halloween, they know who my kids are when they come across the street and trick or treat, because we only trick or treat at like 6 houses, but they give them extra snacks and extra treats. And are these people nice, or are these people complex, or are these people a one-sided idea that ultimately are nothing better than the flag that's waving in front of their house? Or are they actually trying just as hard as we are to be good people in every way, in every place?
And I think one of the biggest things is I was actually talking to my brother-in-law about this last night. We were talking about free will because that's what we do. And he mentioned that he wants to eat unhealthy, but he also wants to eat healthy.
Okay.
And he says one of them wins out more often, and that's the eating unhealthy. And what I said to him was, we are made up of multiple components or parts that can want different and conflicting things. An individual can want good and bad things at the same time. And in fact, they can want mutually exclusive things at the same time. Not only can we, but we often do. And that's because there are a lot of parts of our brain that are part of motivation. So you were talking about these people are trying to be good people. Most people are. But they, just like us, have instincts for ego preservation, us versus them mentality, for protecting their tribe or their group. One reason I like and I don't like the original way I worded this question, which was, what if someone good says something bad? And vice versa. That's because you're trying to stick people into a box. You're trying to stick people into one of two categories. And once again, the real world is more complicated than that. The other example I wanted to bring up, so Dad, if you're listening to this, know that this is all in good faith, fun, whatever. My dad and I've spent years trying to put him in one bucket or the other. And especially as I've learned more about I'll call them isms, my mental isms, I understand certain of his flaws better. As I get to know him better nowadays, I see what you did or are doing or whatever was more complicated than I thought. And you're not always the same person. So it leads to the other exercise. We've already been really talking about it already, but I call this caricature discovery. And that's when you start to realize that you don't have the actual person in your head. You have a caricature of them, a simplified version. Like when someone acts in a way that surprised you. So I'm going to spring this on you now, Spencer. When has someone in your life that you thought you knew acted in a way that completely caught you off guard?
Speaking of dads, my father, when he remarried after my mom died, I told him, I sat him down and I said, you have got a lot of issues, as I perceived that how you acted with my mom were not great. And if you're going to get remarried, you better not do that again. And I was very concerned that he was so fundamentally disposed to act the way that he did with my mom that
you're scared that he was that character that you had.
He was that character. Right? And he surprised me every other week when with his new wife that he would act differently. And not to blame my mom, not to blame my dad, but just there was a certain dynamic that occurred that definitely there was some bad behaviors and bad traits that I never appreciated and valued in their relationship that I saw, but I never saw them when he remarried. And so, yeah, what was your original question?
When has someone that you thought you knew acted in a way that completely took you off guard?
Yeah. And he would do it almost every other week. Every time I'd hang out with him and spend time with him, he was different. And it was really hard to, in some days I was just like, why are you acting the way you are right now? I don't appreciate it because I've already pegged you. I've already put you in the box that I decided you to be in. And this is uncomfortable for me that you keep moving boxes or getting out of the box.
How dare you not fit into my box? Which accurately describes many people's emotional reactions to the world not doing what they want.
Yeah.
What led to you being so wrong about that person? Because if you were right about them and how you knew them, quotation marks, then they wouldn't have surprised you. So what did you miss? What didn't you know?
Honestly, there's a lot of questions. My dad has passed a couple years now, and unfortunately, I wish I could have somehow dug out what the heck was happening and how to figure out how I did get him so wrong. But I feel like one of our themes that keeps coming up is the mote and the beam. And one of the aspects that I think about the mote and the beam is it's the same object. It's the same piece of wood. And if you think about vanishing point, I'm looking at it from the perspective that it's very large, but as it narrows down and I'm pointing that piece of wood at someone else, that it's only affecting a small speck of them. And so every flaw or frustration that I would have with my father, if I take the time to just be reflective for a minute, I realize that it's something that I have as a flaw. Can I blame him because I got it from him? Yeah, sure, I guess.
Yeah, but who's he going to blame? His dad?
Yeah.
His mom?
Yeah, let's blame him, dad, his mom. But ultimately, I have to come to terms with that I'm acting the way that I'm acting. And if it comes from him, that's fine. I can start there, but I still have to do the work to decide to do something different.
I saw a meme that was a fish crawling out of the ocean. It had a bunch of hands flipping it off. And it said, "This a-hole decided to crawl out of the oceans, and now I have to get a job and pay taxes."
Yes, well, let's blame the amphibious fish.
Blame the oh man.
And so figuring out the origin of that frustration or that bad behavior or that good behavior, I think it's a lot easier to point blame at someone for saying, "Oh, well, they did this to me, and this is why I am the way I am." Ideally, I think, can we get into using this for good and saying this is the way I am because I had such good influences and I had good people. And my dad, well, he was not a terrible person. He just had his own flaws. And I could say he taught me to be and do certain things that made me positively what I am today. But at that same time, I find out I revere and respected my father, and then I find out something awful that he did. How do I handle that? Can I trust the good things that I learned from him if I find out that he also did something bad?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's an important next step to this when we're talking about, can I understand someone? Can I know someone? And maybe more importantly, can I put them into the good or the bad bucket? I want to take it a step further and go with okay, therefore what? Let's say you could know for sure if someone in your life, say a family member, was a good person, or let's say you found out they were a bad person. Is the reason you're trying to define that is because you're trying to make requirements or justify judging them or not talking to them? Why do we get so shocked when we find out that somebody acts in a way that we didn't understand or that we didn't expect? Why is that so offensive to us?
I think, trying to keep on the theme of the soldiers, we run into our own actions and the actions of others. And I feel like quite often some of our conversations rely to that spiritual health definition that I had.
Remind me what that was.
Yeah, it's the serenity prayer. Our capacity to understand what we can control and what we cannot control, and how we handle what we cannot control. Being able to understand that I can control myself, I can control my body, and then I find out that someone is doing something that I thought I could control. I thought I could control their thoughts and their behaviors and their actions because they always do X. And then they surprise me and they do something good or do something bad. And I don't like that because they have disrupted my stability or my capacity to see the world. And then all of a sudden they do something for me, against me, that disrupts that, and it makes me feel uneasy. And so our capacity to hold space for complex people is not only a skill, but it's a muscle.
So we've defined that you really can't understand people absolutely, especially not enough to put them into a good or a bad bucket or be able to anticipate how they're going to behave for the rest of your life.
Sure.
I have two practical questions to come out of that, and you've already talked about part of one of them. One is, how am I supposed to view people? Do I just say, okay, I don't know anybody and give up? Say, what's the point? How do I use what we've talked about so far to improve my interactions with other people? To have better relationships?
I want that to be the final question of the podcast, just because I don't want to answer it. I mean, that's probably the most complex, but also the best question to be asking is, okay, fine, then what? We know that these people are complex, or we need to practice allowing people to be complex. Then what? One of the thoughts I had is, do I let my kid play with every single kid on the playground? Do I let them come over to my house, or do I let my kid go over to their house? And I think the word safety comes to mind. Well, there's still a factor of safety that I have to protect myself from, and being able to manage the security that I need, either for my child or for myself. Does that mean we need more practice being in uncomfortable situations? Or are there just certain places and certain safety nets that we just need to acknowledge that we need, and then allow ourselves to have challenging situations, but also have safety places? And I think I'm begging the question, which is, I genuinely believe that there's places where we need to have safe spaces and feel comfortable.
When you say safe, do you mean a space that you can be safe from that discomfort? Like say that there's somebody that's difficult to be with.
Yeah.
You don't have to be with them
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, this is completely relevant to, hope I don't get in trouble for this. My wife and her parents were talking last night about a girl in their neighborhood that was mentally challenged, socially challenged. And in Young Women's, they'd always put my wife with her.
Mm.
And her mom was talking about it from the perspective of, yeah, that's because you're a good person and you can understand people better, and you're not judging like some of these other people will immediately judge mentally or socially mentally disabled people. She mentioned it a bit then, but she's told me a lot. My wife has told me a lot about, she was miserable.
Mm.
They always stuck my wife with that girl. My wife has always had a hard time establishing boundaries with people and being like, no, you can't do X. No, you can't just sit on me and giggle and pee on me.
Ew.
Sorry, I'm probably getting too many details here. But I guess what I'm arguing for is that safe space. It's, yeah, you can understand people, and JC, my wife, can understand that person, but that doesn't mean that she should be the one that is being required to be with that person all the time in a way that she doesn't feel safe, because now she has a hard time being around those types of people, because as a child and a teenager, she kept getting put with this person, and JC didn't know how to communicate. Oh, no, you don't do that to me.
Yeah.
Or no, you don't act like that with me. And I've got socially limited people in my family, and that's something that I do feel comfortable doing, is saying, yeah, don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's contrast that for Funzo with my wife. She grew up with people with mental disabilities and certain disabilities, that either in the community or within family, and she grew to love them and never felt pressured and greatly enjoyed that experience. Where now she works for a home with people with disabilities, adults with disabilities, and she basically just lives with them, or she takes a shift and she hangs out in their house, and she just makes sure that they manage their laundry and their dishes, and they're fed and they're taken care of. And she thoroughly enjoys it. And she tells me it's like hanging out with my friends. Right. And that contrast is, I don't fully know the history of why my wife enjoyed it when she was younger. And I think self-advocacy that you're speaking to about your wife is being able to say no and set some boundaries. But for some reason, that same experience, if it sounds like JC would have a horrible time working where my wife is working, and that's okay. That's not for her. But yet, for some reason, my wife can thoroughly enjoy it, and she comes just beaming every time she comes back. She experiences some really hard things with them during the course of an 8-hour shift, but she comes away just loving and enjoying those people that she gets to play with. And she says it's like a second home. And in some ways, she gets more mad because she tells them what to do, they listen. And when she tells our kids what to do, they don't listen. And she's like, oh, why can't you be like my friends at work? What is the difference? Oh, man, I don't know. I'm not sure where it is that one event affects a person differently, but I think we need to hold space for that. We need to be able to allow for other people to not have a bad experience and say, yeah, maybe there is something there that we need to respect and listen to. And the same experience that you had with me, I for a long time, there was a phrase that I told myself when talking with other people was, if you knew what I knew, you would do what I do. And after a while, I realized the counterpoint to that is, if I knew what they knew, then I would be doing what they're doing. But counterpoint, if we both experience the same thing, it's okay for both of us to come away with different perspectives. And that we need to allow people to be just a little bit more complex than what we currently think they are.
I like that. And I think that's actually probably a real darn good spot to stop the podcast. The question that we were ending on was, knowing that you can't know someone absolutely, how do you know them as well as you can? And how do you deal with people when they do act differently than you expect?
Mm-hmm.
Taking that an extension further, social or personal expectations belong to the people having the expectation, not the other person.
Yeah.
All right, friends.
Thanks for listening.
And have a good day. Bye.